Afternoon, everybody.
After lunch.
My name is Will Grant. I'm also from the Australian National Centre for Colour Awareness and Science. I'm here just to chair another session of lightning talks. We have 4 talks now this afternoon to go. So first off, I'm going to introduce Cooper Smout. Cooper, take it away.
Thanks, Will. Hi, everyone. I'll be presenting on Wisdom, which is a project that we've been developing with some of this community here. So Jimmy Barber and Fnan, Matt Ruby and Aidan Tan. And this is a framework that we're developing to allow communities to do what we're calling community-driven value accounting. That works. So academia is broken. I think it's why we're all here. We know that there are better ways that we can do things. Personally, I think that we need systemic change. And as Buckminster Fuller would say, you don't change things by fighting the existing reality. You change things by building a new model that makes the old model obsolete. And so this is the goal for Wisdom. We are building a system that aims to quantify the relative value of diverse contributions to a community so that people can be directly rewarded for the value that they create. And the idea is that this can create a virtuous cycle of value creation and incentivize the creation of public goods. And in my years of campaigning for open science practices, I reached one main conclusion, which is that we really need to directly recognize the value that reviews provide. And this then leads to the idea of meta reviews. But of course, then there's this problem of infinite recursion because someone needs to review the meta reviews, someone needs to review the meta reviews, and so on. And so what I'm going to present to you today is a really simple model that I think takes a step towards solving this problem while remaining empirically controlled, flexible to diverse contribution types, and maximally inclusive to everyone in the community. And so the basic mechanism is just pairwise comparisons. We give someone 2 contributions and ask them to tell us which is more X, where X is each dimension of interest. And we couple this with a meta review process, which is the exact same, except one of these items is now some number of pairwise comparisons themselves. And the point I want to make is that if we recognize these pairwise comparisons as a fundamental unit of value to the community, then all we need is these 2 processes, and we can create an automatic score for every single contribution that we review through this system. So I'm going to show you how this works through a data set that we collected after last year's AIMOS conference, using the same model that we prototyped and validated in the context of festivals with our citizen science community Open Heart and Mind. And after that conference last year, we ran a prototype study that we then rated and reviewed contributions to the conference itself. And so some of you participated in this co-creation. We sent out a form where people nominated contributions. We got a wide variety of nominations, including talks. We recognized people's registration fees, as well as really random stuff like someone who balanced attendance at discussion groups. And we selected a representative sample of these and reviewed them on 6 dimensions of interest that were nominated by the community. So this then is a fully balanced design where every contribution is compared to every other contribution twice. And then we also included these review contributions where we then once again balanced this design. And what this gives us then is a data set where we can fit a baseline to the meta review votes. And using that function, we can interpolate a score for every single contribution. And critically, throughout this entire process, no one has needed to do anything more complicated than a pairwise comparison. And because we can do this on any dimensions we're interested in, we end up with a multi-dimensional matrix that shows the unique qualities of every single contribution. And from there, well, we get to play with the data because now we've got a fully transparent public good resource that we can filter in any way that we're interested. So we can look at particular contributions, contributors, we can create reputation profiles for contributors in the ways that they've contributed. And of course, we can also look at the reviews themselves to make sure that people are being reliable and doing this task as we ask them. And so for this data set, as I said, it was a representative sample of contributions, but we then took this data and extrapolated for all 163 contributions that we identified for the conference. So we did this by calculating an average amount of gratitude per minute per contribution type, as well as an amount of gratitude per dollar. And what this gives us then is this ridiculously big spreadsheet that shows the relative value of every single contribution that we could record. And then you can do really interesting analyses like these cost-benefit analyses where we're looking at the total gratitude for contributions versus, say, the cost that went into them, showing that in some cases there's a surplus, some cases there's a deficit, in other cases there's a really big deficit, but this isn't necessarily saying that people didn't appreciate the plenary talks. Probably what it's saying is that we haven't fully captured all of the value that those plenary speakers provided, And we need to then work on this in the next iteration to internalize that value that we're currently externalizing. And so this then is now filtering according to contributors and showing that of all of the contributors, there was one person who really stood out, and I want to celebrate and honor our valiant president here who put in an order of magnitude effort more than anyone else, and recognize that that gratitude that the community expressed was almost equivalent to the entire budget that AIMOS put towards last year's conference. So thank you. And so hopefully you can see that this is a step towards an automated grant system where a funder could take some money and distribute it via this system in some way that works with their intentions. So we could filter according to particular projects that they wanted to support, and that money could be distributed automatically based on the value that people have provided. And so then if we zoom out, the idea is that this can incentivize a cycle of value creation within one community. But of course, this can be operating at multiple communities because this is a fundamental mechanism that could have operated in any community that has any type of contribution. And the idea is that if two communities recognize the same values like gratitude, then this creates a very attractable pathway for them to recognize and reward contributions in each other's communities and potentially cooperate more effectively to achieve their common goals. And so there was a lot of talk yesterday in the meeting about funding being a problem for AIMOS. As I mentioned, there's a lot of money in the crypto space, and I can speak to this solving a real problem in the decentralized world of decentralized autonomous organizations. So I would suggest that if we adopt a system like this and we were to get behind it as a community, we could validate that it has the support of the scientific community, and that could then potentially attract funding from those spheres of the society that have the money that we need to do the research that we want to do. And so if this interests you, I'd love to invite you to our hackathon tomorrow. We'll be replicating our prototype and building on that to recognize contributions to this conference. We also would love contributors in communications, stats, visualization, and really anything. But even if you can't make our hackathon tomorrow, we'd love if you can fill in this form, because this is an opportunity for you not to nominate contributions to this conference that will then be reviewed in our next prototype. Thanks very much.
Thank you. My name is Zach. I'm joining from the Scholarly Communications team at the University of Melbourne, where a lot of my work focuses on supporting researchers with different open access pathways, other aspects of open science and open scholarship. I want to talk about the read and publish agreements that many of you may have noticed have been appearing at universities over the last few years. These have been gradually replacing libraries' read-only journal subscriptions. They allow at least some open access publishing without author-facing open access charges or APCs. The Council of Australasian University Librarians has been leading negotiations on these with publishers, offering agreements to member libraries for possible uptake. These are the 25 agreements that have been on offer through call this year. You'll see those 6 on the left are capped agreements, meaning that they only cover a limited number of articles in the calendar year. Of these, only the agreement with Wiley includes fully open access titles. The others only cover hybrid journals or subscription journals. And of those, many exclude certain titles or portfolios. Springer Nature and Elsevier, for example, exclude their prestigious Nature and Lancet and Cell Press journals, respectively. Fortunately, the rest of the agreements are uncapped, so unlimited open access publishing, and many of those include open access journals as well. And of those, you'll see many smaller publishers, independent presses, nonprofits. In terms of uptake by universities across Australia, we see 4 agreements have been taken up by all 38 public universities. That's Wiley, Elsevier, Springer Nature, and Taylor and Francis. A further 6 have been taken up by 30 or more institutions. That includes Sage, Oxbridge. When we look at the open access trend over the last 14 years since 2010. This is just simply breaking down between publishing open, that is under an open license, and publishing without an open license. We see a pretty steady increase from 2010 to 2021, then a more rapid jumps up in 2022 and 2023. We can break that down a bit more granularly by pathway to open access. We can see that gold open access used to dominate that open access publishing component. That is publishing in fully open access journals, whereas recently there's been this explosion of hybrid open access pathways publishing open access in subscription journals. Of course, there's still being some pathways for repository open access there as well in that top half. Using metadata from call, and I should specify that this data is a proportion of research articles with one or more Australian authors using data collected from Dimensions. We can do DOI matching to check that against the call, read, and publish metadata list of what's been covered under the agreements and see the actual impact of the agreements. So we see people are still continuing to spend more on hybrid APCs, but the vast majority now of that hybrid open access pathway is via the call agreements. Meanwhile, those agreements have had very little impact on the gold open access publishing. We can do more granular analyses, look at publisher level data. We don't really have time for that. I will just point out one thing, that this hybrid open access pathway via the agreements that are in place does see the traditional big five commercial publishers kind of reassembled as the top five in the Australian publishing landscape, despite that not being true overall. So finishing with some reflections and what's next. So the agreements are overwhelmingly supporting subscription journal publishing models. And by and large, these read and publish agreements are not transformative. They are not seeing journals or publishers become fully open access. What this also means is that open access publishers, quality open access publishers like PLOS, eLife are being left behind because these agreements are based on existing library subscription spends. And as are many small presses, independent presses, and nonprofits that either don't have these models or haven't been engaged in negotiations yet. There are a lot of indications that authors are preferentially publishing in titles covered by these agreements so that they can benefit from open access without facing fees, and sometimes using these coverage lists as just a guide of where to publish. This, of course, contributes to further market consolidation. So there's now widespread recognition globally and even by call themselves that these agreements are either not supporting or are actively hampering a move to a fully open access scholarly publishing ecosystem. In terms of what comes next, many of our agreements are expiring next year. New multi-year agreements will be negotiated. It's really important to stay aware of what's happening at your institutions, maybe engage in consultation processes around what you value there. May be aware of the chief scientist proposals around the public access model for open access. This would involve nationalizing these read and publish agreements. But this has been faced a lot of critique from CALL, Open Access Australasia, and other peak groups that are instead calling for a multifaceted approach to open science more broadly. Being in agreement that any approach should strive to foster bibliodiversity, which these agreements are not doing. They should be striving to foster different communities, disciplines, authors, output types, and different pathways to open access. So I'll just finish with a kind of reiterating the point that's come up a few times, that we really need to be investing in scholar-led, community-owned, and non-profit open access and open science initiatives. And I implore those here to speak to your faculties and librarians about initiatives that are important to you and that you would like to see funded. So, thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for taking your time out of your day to listen to us. My name is Jack Connor, and I'll be presenting today on what is keeping researchers from publishing registered reports. So for a little bit of background, in case you don't know what registered reports are, it's a type of publication method where you develop an idea, design your study as you normally would, and then you send it into a journal for a stage 1 peer review, where they look it over and sort of say, like, this looks like a good methodology or this doesn't. And then after they approve it, they give it in principal acceptance that says, if you stick to this plan, you'll publish your paper. You collect your data, you collect and analyze your data, you write the report, you send it in for a second stage of peer review, just like a sort of like final check to make sure you followed the methodology that was approved, and your paper would be published. Some major benefits of registered reports are the increased publication of null results, the prevention of p-hacking, and the promotion of higher quality research methods, all of which help make science more open and transparent. And this begs the question of why registered reports aren't more commonly used. So for this study, we had an opening discussion with participants in which we asked them about their prior knowledge on registered reports, as well as their thoughts on things like pressure to publish and p-hacking. And then we had an information session in which we talked to them about how register reports worked. And this consisted of 9 focus groups filled with 25 psychology researchers total. Afterwards, we had a closing discussion and we asked them about their final thoughts on register reports, any concerns they might have, and any sort of issues they could see arising. We collected this data and analyzed the transcripts to draw our conclusions from this study. So for the pre-presentation, we have a few quotes that kind of summarize the sentiment. So people like sort of express that they wish they would have more workshops about register reports, and that people might be caught up in traditional papers and traditional publishing, and that's why they aren't adopting this methods. They also thought that null results were helpful even before the presentation, and felt worried about pressure to publish as a sort of deterrent to this register reports, because people just want to get published as quickly as possible. After the presentation, though, we saw people were a little worried about the timeline of registered reports, as it can take a long time before you're able to collect and analyze your data after you get before you get your in-principle acceptance. But they also felt a lot more comfortable after the presentation, and that they thought it was a lot more helpful to have registered reports. Additionally, they felt null results were incredibly helpful since they could show what hadn't worked in research so that you don't waste your time and resources to do so. In addition to these raw participant statements, we had 2 sets of 2 blind independent coders to summarize participant transcripts, which created a condensed and consistent set of general sentiments that we could analyze, which is where we got these word clouds from. So we can see that in the opening discussion, people, obviously throughout there was a lot of talk of concerns. We also saw people talk about timeline in the opening discussion, whereas it didn't appear much in the information session, but it appeared again in the closing discussion, as well as much more frequently null results, which, as mentioned previously, participants thought were a large benefit of publishing registered reports. And here's the overall word cloud, where we see that by and large, concern was the most frequently said word by these, or the most frequent sentiment by these participants. And so we decided to look further into that to see which words occurred with concern the most. And we see that timeline was the largest to co-occur with concern, as well as data analysis and time and collection. And so this kind of highlights the idea that participants or researchers are worried about the time it takes to collect and analyze data for registered reports, because you have to write it up and then wait till you get that in-principle acceptance before you start your data collection. In addition to this data, we have a set of pairwise correlations, which map how frequently words appeared together relative to their overall frequency. We see that concern and timeline are obviously very highly correlated, as well as null results in publishing. But we also see this ensure proper analysis at the bottom, which was another sort of highlight of the presentations that researchers enjoyed, that register reports helped ensure proper analysis. Finally, we went into what was the most frequent questions that, or like types of statements that participants said during each of the time points. So in the opening discussion, people were asking questions about the implementation and knowledge of registered reports, as well as talking about their own feelings on pressure to publish, whereas the information session was mainly clarification, and the closing discussion was mostly clarification, as well as open discussions, and along with topics like registered reports, which was one of the major benefits of registered reports that they found. In conclusion, we need more knowledge about registered reports in order for researchers to feel more comfortable, as this showed that an information session helps people feel more comfortable with the topic, and not knowing about it can be like a major deterrent to actually conducting a registered report. And timeline is obviously a very, very large concern, but we need more dissemination of information in order for researchers to publish registered reports more frequently. I would like to thank the NSF for funding the study, as well as the Quantitative Research Collaboratory and Amanda Montoya, William Krenzer, and Jennifer Dean for their contributions to this project. And thank you for taking your time to listen.